Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Mirzwa, and I'm a Senior Director for our Global Resilience, Cyber, and AI programs here at Commvault, and you are in for an incredible treat. I am joined by Phil Goodwin today, and we are going to have a fireside chat, the new CISO Playbook, the next evolution in enterprise resilience. But before I get started, time for a little embarrassing intro for Phil. We are incredibly lucky to have Phil here today. He is the Research Vice President for IDC's Worldwide Infrastructure Programs, and he has 30 years of experience both on the client side and on the research side in data protection, resilience, and of course, cyber. And Phil, can't tell you how excited we are to have you. Your perspective, the clients you get to speak with on a day-to-day basis, from small to medium to the largest of enterprises globally, is something I know everybody that's tuning in wants to hear about. So thank you for being here.
It's awesome, Chris. You know, that you and I have been chatting about this for a while. And so the topic, I think, is very timely. And I think there's a lot of really interesting, groundbreaking kinds of thoughts that we're going to talk about today.
We've been noticing something over the last few years. I know, you have as well, and we'll get into it. But we have conversation after conversation, whether they're current clients or their prospects, around cyber resiliency and the readiness of their particular enterprise. And there's something that kind of kept coming up. I mean, this idea of constant disruption. And I don't think that's new, right? I mean, there's no earth-shattering moment that's occurred. We know that that's happening. But people are saying, I need to make a change. I need to do something different across the enterprise, IT, and all of the related components to just be better at this, right? To think about it differently. And I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Sometimes all the ideas are not new. Sometimes you need a new nomenclature, you need a new framework, if you will, to do that. And I know you guys are great at that. So what are your thoughts on that? Do we sometimes almost need to reboot things, especially to, like, right now, try to figure out how we focus on being a better optimized organization to deal with these kind of disruptions?
Yeah, a lot of times, Chris, as time marches on, we don't really take the time to step back and try and look at the big picture and reassess it. Instead, we're as IT people, we're caught fighting the daily fires. We're caught trying to keep up with new technologies, with new initiatives in the organization, and so on and so forth, and just don't have time to take that step back and to really reassess where we are as an organization and whether or not we're continuing to meet the requirements of the organization. So I think you're absolutely correct that every once in a while, we do need to take that step back and say, okay, is there a better way that we can approach this? And that doesn't mean throwing out everything that we've already done, but it does mean kind of taking that fresh view of it.
And to that end, right, we've had discussions. You came to Shift. Thank you. You were well represented there. Got to hear a number of our announcements. And, one of the things that we premiered there was this idea of how can our overall operations be more resilient? How can we operationalize resiliency? So we said, well, first off, if we don't create a new acronym, what good is it, Phil? Come on. It has been easily 6 to 7 seconds since someone created a new acronym here in the IT space. So we said we should join that party. And so we took resilience and operations and put them together, and we're calling it ResOps. And people can go, oh, here we go, new six letters, but it's really what it means. And so the work that we put together and that we're now bringing to the community is this idea of resilient operations, building something that, to your point, isn't necessarily new, but allows us to plug in maybe existing pieces that we already have, but plug the gaps or optimize the gaps that we have. And so you get to have a lot of calls, and I know you'll obfuscate names to protect the innocent, but can you maybe give a feel for some of the Groundhog Day conversations that you have? And then maybe for everybody listening, how do you punch through that? How, when you're having these type of conversations, what do you see separates the folks that get kind of stuck versus the ones that can break out and can make change at the enterprise level to be more resilient.
Well, yeah, when I did hear that term res ops or resiliency ops at the Shift conference, I was immediately struck and taken by that term because it seemed to so accurately capture exactly the kinds of practices that we need to take on as organizations to really bring the whole picture together in terms of that resilience. But I go back into the industry when the primary media for backing up data was magnetic tape. Back in that day, it was all about backup and recovery and doing it every 24 hours and things like that. And then 9/11 happened, and then Hurricane Sandy happened. And all of a sudden, in the collective consciousness became this drive towards disaster recovery. And everything was all about disaster recovery, and people were looking for ways to do that. Then along comes cyber threats, and all of a sudden everybody's all about cyber threats and talking about business continuance and business resilience. But what has happened, though, is you can't take that backup and recovery and bolt on disaster recovery and bolt on cyber recovery and bolt on continuance and expect to have any kind of real business outcome from that. Now, backup and recovery is still the core of that. You've got to have that. How you discipline that and how you do it has evolved over the years, but it's still fundamentally the baseline ability that organizations need to have. But what I really liked about the resiliency ops term is that it starts to build in the whole process of the people, process, and the technology. And I think of it as kind of an umbrella term under which you have IT ops, you have SecOps, and you even have DevOps to be able to create that entire framework that spans the organization to be able to address those kinds of resiliency requirements.
It's funny you mentioned DevOps. When we were thinking about this, we took a look at that movement. And I think, in fact, you and I talked about this a few months ago. I think we're almost at 13 years, roughly 13 years since that term was first introduced to sort of where it is today. And of course, it continues to evolve, right? I mean, there's no static nature because clearly every enterprise is different, right? Both size, complexity, vertical, whatever it may be. And I think we're hoping the same happens here. We can only hope for the same success that DevOps has had as a community has given it life. That's what we're looking for this to do, right? Same thing. To that end, if people are trying to find a place to start, you sort of maybe your top two conversations that you have probably many, many times over. People talk about budget. People talk about people and complexity and politics and lack thereof, maybe of inter and intra-group communication. Do you find one or two things bubble to the top when you're like, here's what you need to do?
Well, in a lot of cases, what we find is, there's the typical maturity curve where you have people at both ends of the scale and the majority somewhere in the middle. One of the major mistakes I find organizations making when they start this journey is really focusing on the technology. And it's something that we call the silver bullet problem, where if I just buy the right technology, everything will be okay. All I got to do is get my budget approved and buy these tools and everything will be okay. Then there's the other part of that where what we call hero worship, where we know that our staff is incredibly talented. They're experienced. They know what they're doing. Now, it's not documented, but they've got it all up here in what they can do. And so they can get us out of anything. And again, that's what we call hero worship. Organizations that evolve past that start to look at that holistically. And so rather than starting at what is the technology that I need, or even what are the people that I need, I think organizations need to start with what is the team that I need. And that team needs to include executive sponsorship. It needs to include IT ops, SecOps, the CIO, the CISO, the senior leaders of the IT organization, but also the senior leaders of the businesses. Because to take that team and to charter it with that functional requirement of, okay, what are the business outcomes that we need? What are the requirements that we have? and then establish the KPIs and the SLAs and the things that will achieve those kinds of business outcomes, I believe is where mature organizations really start to tackle the problem.
And because I'm sure we have a varied set of folks listening, can the medium-sized enterprises do this? Can large to medium SMB? Where have you seen success up and down the size of company, or is there a specific sort of sweet spot?
I think it's regardless of size of organization. Obviously, if you're mom and pop, that's a little bit different because people wear so many different hats. But even when you get into a medium-sized organization where you have, say, 50 people in your IT organization, or 500 people in the total organization, kind of thing, I think there's plenty of room there for that cross-functional team, because you still have business stakeholders, you still have IT teams, you still have people who are tasked with data security and network security and trying to keep the bad guys out. So I think it's a discipline that really spans smaller organizations all the way up to the very largest, Chris.
Good. So, I mean, so we have not lost any, but it's like the Nielsen ratings. I'm looking to see if anybody dropped. I know it's not real time, but good. You've kept everybody in the boat. Yes, it will look different for maybe organizations with smaller, and there may be a few multiple hats. But again, then it's a taxonomy that can scale, right? I mean, you hope all of those companies hope that if they have, I don't know, let's put up a number, 50 people in IT, if the company does well, the whole company's going to grow, and there could be 75 or 100 in a few years. And then they can start hiring the right skills to have discrete capability in particular parts of this whole, res ops chain, or as they tie all of these different disciplines together. But back to your calls, a lot of this has to start at the top, right? We're just starting to see CISOs and CIOs, even if they report to each other or if they're peers, building better relationships. But are there a couple silver bullets that leadership should be having, for those that are listening, or for those that report to senior leaders, that should be trying to convince their CISOs or CIOs to take a first step? Where do you see it get the most traction?
Where it gets the most traction is really where the CEO is involved. That's some level of accountability. You can think of the RACI matrix and things like that. But the CEO needs to have visibility and drive accountability for what goes on within the organization. Of course, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are responsible for things when they go good and when they go bad. It's really at that top level that we find the executive sponsorship to be critical, Chris. But then from that, having the senior leaders, the CIO, the CTO, the CISO, general managers, people like that, who then have their own staff members who are tasked with the actual implementation of these kinds of operations. Because after you go from the perspective of, okay, what are the KPIs? What are those business outcomes we want? The next step I recommend is, okay, take a look at what your threat requirements are. What are those threats out there that could make things go wrong? And I'll throw out one statistic here that I probably throw out all the time, which is only about 31% of organizations are able to fully recover from a cyber attack without paying the ransom. And that's been true for the last probably 4 years that we've been doing these surveys, Chris. So, we've got to get better. We've got to do better. And I think it's part of that threat assessment that says, okay, how are the things that could go wrong? Because once you have at least taken a shot at all the things that can go wrong, now you can start to match technologies. Now you can start to develop processes. Now you can start to define roles and skill sets that are required to do that. And so I think that's how you start to build down through this ResOps process to take a look at how do we provide that kind of resilience across the entire organization.
That is fascinating, because you need catalysts, right? It has to happen at the highest level, but it has to permute down, and they have to understand the mission. Some of these things we could take the time machine back 20 years, change ResOps to something different, and we could we could be talking about disaster recovery, and we'd say the same thing. And even then, we struggled with getting either semi-annual tests or annual tests. And now it's almost amazing I understand budgets. We hear it all the time,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you do in executive conversations, we do with, clients, but there has to be a priority right now, given just the sheer sharp edge that the bad actors are taking. And I have a question there. So as you see people with AI, you knew the term was coming, everybody. How is that conversation now when you're having chats with CEOs, CIOs, CISOs, CDOs, whoever they may be? How is that changing priorities? Is it the jab that they need to maybe move off of some of the stuck that they've had? I'm just curious how those conversations are going when you're having them.
Well, you're right, Chris. AI is creating a lot of disruption, and we've seen some pretty significant headlines lately of companies, going all in on AI and attempting to completely reorganize their company based on AI. But what we recommend is really that you take a layered approach to it. So there's AI that can provide a better experience for the user, for the customer. Chat types of functionality can do a lot of that. They can also help with support and service, self-service kind of things. But then there's also the what I would call the more internal types of AI, and that is where processes get orchestrated using AI. It brings in agentic, and agentic, by the way, is not replacing people. It does help to automate some of those routine processes, but I haven't seen it really replacing people, and I don't think it's going to, because there's certain things that people are always going to be able to do that an AI machine can't do. It'll evolve for sure, just like the typewriter evolved with the personal computer, but nevertheless, that the requirements are still there. So then it gets into, how do you build this layer of internal, built-in, and external types of AI into your organization in order to get that better business outcome?
And maybe this is a fallacy, so would love for you to break this down however you see it.
Sure.
There's a lot of chat about, people are very concerned as to, if these tools are amazing for us in our enterprise, imagine what they are doing for the bad actors. And at least in some of the conversations we have on our customer councils, one-on-ones, some folks are appropriately afraid of that, right? When I say appropriately, we can't bury ourselves under the rug, but we have to admit that if it is this powerful and it is moving at the speed it is, are executives realizing this? Are they admitting to that? Or are we making too big of a deal about how powerful that's going to make the bad guys?
I don't think it's too big a deal at all, Chris. I've kind of had this joke that if you really want to hire the best AI programmers, go hire them from the bad guys. There's a lot of truth to that. If you look at some of the things that are going on now with being able to take somebody's likeness and image and overlay their voice and get them to say anything you want, and other AI technologies, it's pretty breathtaking in many cases. The bad actors, to your point, are using that to more effectively target end users to get credentials. And one of the ways people get in is through compromised credentials, phishing,
right,
email, all those kind of things. And the more sophisticated you can make that, without the typos, without the bad grammar and things like that, the more real it becomes. And AI gives actors the tools to do that. So, and the only way we're going to fight the AI is with AI.
Right.
And organizations like Commvault, who build that kind of thing in, build those defenses in. But of course, not only Commvault, because it is an ecosystem. Even when you look at ResOps, it's an ecosystem. You have SIM tools, SOAR tools, you have SOCs, you have NOCs, and all of those things need to be brought into this community that makes up the ResOps practice across the organization. So you really have to take that broad view, both horizontal and vertical, in terms of how you would put that together.
So do you see it having an effect at that executive and board level to reprioritize or move funding or allocate additional funding? Is it causing that to happen, or do you think we're just at the beginning of that curve?
Absolutely. So based on the surveys that we've done, and we do them every month, by the way, the number one priority for investment right now is AI, not a shock.
Yeah.
For a long time, it was data security.
Sure.
So, but now data security is number two. And what we find is organizations are backing off of AI initiatives because of governance and security concerns. In other words, they're not rolling them out. They may be developing them, but when they get into them, they realize that there are a lot of holes, there are a lot of vulnerabilities, and so they never roll them out. So that security is a huge, huge part of that factor.
Thank you for bringing that up, because one thing, right? Hopefully those folks are listening going, all right, that's interesting. When I hear these numbers and AI funding is moved to the top, security number two, hopefully some of that quote AI funding is actually going to go to securing AI, right? To governing AI. Or do you see money that's quote in that allocate when you're doing your surveys, that allocation bucket for AI? Is some of it for those things, or is that just all for pure play AI development?
No, that's for both security as well as backup and recovery, by the way.
Okay.
Backup and recovery is a close third behind security in terms of investment priorities. Organizations are looking at not just how do I secure my data, but really how do I secure my AI systems? How do I make sure that they're not infected with bad data or malicious data? How do I assure that I don't have data exfiltration occurring in this? And so they're investing in projects designed to improve customer use or organizational efficiency or things like that through AI. But they're also investing in internal systems on how to get better security, better data protection, better orchestration, really the whole thing on how they improve their resiliency as an organization.
It makes me think we have I know you've seen it, and I think you have your own version of this, but it's sort of a bingo card. Think of it as a massive bingo card. I mean, like cruise ship style. And, we call the event or some cyber attack, boom, right? Left of boom before it happens, of course, right of boom after. And the number of point products, solutions, services, et cetera, wrapped around left of boom, right? Those investments have to be made. They keep a lot of bad people out. They hopefully prevent, they give you monitoring, all the things you've mentioned. But when you look at the number of logos to the left of an event versus the number of logos that exist to the right of the event, it almost looks like nothing exists to the right. There's so much money and time to that left side. So as we kind of go into wrap up phase, I love talking about where things are going in the future. And of course, nobody's got a better read on that than you at IDC and yourself, because you're not just looking at what's going on today, you're kind of looking out forward. Do you see that changing, or do you see some of the logos to the left of boom, if you will, making investments and acquisitions to be stronger post these events? Or how do you see that evolving over the coming years?
Yeah, I use a slightly different analogy, Chris, and that is shift left, shift right. And maybe will actually work with your bingo analogy as well. But what we see is those organizations that were really focused on data recovery and those organizations that really focused on data security really getting closer and closer together, because those disciplines are so closely aligned. Even at IDC, I find myself collaborating with my data security colleagues all the time because they are so heavily integrated. When you think of that as a practical matter within an organization, I think it's symbolic of how an IT ops team and a SecOps team need to work together. And I'll add in DevOps to that too, Chris, because applications now need to be designed with threat actors in mind. They need to be designed with zero trust architectures. They need to be designed with the idea that something is going to go wrong. And how do we protect from that? And so I think it is really, like you're talking about those things coming together within IDC, how we're coming together, and then within an IT organization, how those different teams are coming together and collaborating to really create a better infrastructure to address these threats.
All right, everyone, these are the nuggets you came for. This is it. I mean, Phil just backed up the ops truck on that. The fact that you're having those conversations, and probably you and, let's say, your data security peers probably on, I'm guessing, same calls, right? I mean, I know you have discrete
Yes.
calls. You're probably having multiple. If there's a takeaway, the fact that you're having those and you all are in the leadership position you are in advising clients on both where they are today and where they need to go to be more resilient, that's a huge takeaway. These are the same parallel conversations that need to happen in the enterprise. And I hope if ResOps is a way for you, the listener, to have that conversation in your enterprise, embrace it. If you need to change it to make it your own, it is not static. And to that end, I'm going to talk in a moment here about how we want the community's involvement, right, Phil? Because you mentioned DevOps, and we talked about it a few minutes ago as well. We want this to evolve. It's in its infancy stage, and we want to help mold and shape it, but we need the community to do that. We've got some cool ways. So I guess in closing, Phil, I want to circle back to what is the one thing someone can start at, if there is one, not to put you on the spot, but, all right, they listen, some incredible information. Where do they start? What should they do after this?
Yeah, again, I think it's start at the top. Start from, your assessment, start from the team and making sure that team addresses this whole thing. And I do want to say too, Chris, that when you start talking about ResOps, what you said a moment ago is spot on. If this term, I mean, I get that you guys coined the term, but if it only stays within Commvault, it's not going to be very successful. It really requires that community involvement, where people pitch in from different perspectives, different vendors, different organizations, different teams that really make that come to life, just like DevOps or SecOps or any of the others.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes effort, and we're willing to put in the effort. Phil, I can't thank you enough for being here. Your stories, the advice you're giving. I hope people understand. You're very humble, but the gravity in which Phil has these conversations with the biggest companies in the world, even if that is not you. I mean, that's not us. We're not the biggest company in the world, but those are folks you want to take ideas from. The people like Phil having those discussions realize the weight of these data points. I know I do, and in the discussions, Phil, we have, and you have with all of the folks here at Commvault, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been absolutely fantastic.
It's awesome, Chris. Thanks so much.
Before we leave, I'm going to leave you with one thought. Clearly, based on our conversation, the role of the CISO is changing. It's no longer about just prevention or even recovery. It's how you enable the entire business to work through that disruption and do it with confidence. So what we're seeing is not a one-time shift. This has to be operationalized. And right, Phil and I had this conversation, and it is so important. It starts at the top. So stay aligned, have the right conversations in your enterprise. That's what's going to make the difference. And to that end, that's why we built our Readyverse site. So I encourage everybody to go over to readyverse.com. Not only do we have everything you've just heard about ResOps, we have additional white papers, we have ongoing cyber research there, and we have an enormous amount of content that is always being refreshed. So readyverse.com is your site for everything, including education as well. We have a number of different links that take you so you can go to the next step, especially if you're a practitioner. And to that end, I want to mention something pretty exciting. Talk to Phil, right, toward the end of our discussion about making sure community is involved in helping kind of move this ResOps forward. So we have created a LinkedIn group. You will find the link to that on readyverse.com. And I encourage you to come, join the group, Be part of the movement. Bring your positive comments, bring your constructive feedback. We want it all. The only way this is going to really take hold, and you heard it directly from Phil, is with the community. So we look forward to seeing you there and appreciate the time. And I hope you got a lot out of today. Thank you so much.